Dawn came thin and colorless, the kind that made the land look unfinished. The creek cut through the low ground like a quiet scar, its water moving slow, carrying leaves, carrying secrets, carrying whatever people were ashamed to leave behind. Cottonwoods leaned over it with tired branches, and the air held that cold which seeps into bone before the sun remembers its duty. The cowboy rode in without hurry. He had learned long ago that rushing rarely fixed anything. His horse lowered its head toward the water, steam rising from its nostrils, while the man stayed in the saddle a moment longer than necessary, listening. The land had its own language. Most days it spoke in wind and insects. That morning it spoke wrong. The sound came again, thin, broken, almost swallowed by the creek itself. The cowboy stiffened, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. He dismounted and followed the sound downstream, boots sinking into damp earth. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself knew what waited and wished to slow him. He saw the sack tangled against a fallen branch, burlap, tied with rough twine, half-soaked, rocking gently as the current pulled at it like an impatient hand. For a long moment he only stood there, heart thudding, because some truths announce themselves before they are seen. He knelt, fingers clumsy, and cut the twine. Inside was a baby, small, too small, skin pale as creek foam, lips tinged blue. Her chest moved, barely, like she was uncertain whether staying was worth the effort. The cowboy made a sound he did not recognize and pulled her free, pressing her against his coat, against the place where his heart had learned to stay quiet. She stirred. A tiny fist tightened in the wool of his shirt. Her mouth opened, searching. And from somewhere deep, from a place older than fear, came a whisper. "Mama." The word landed between them like a claim. The cowboy closed his eyes, breath shaking. He had buried too many things in his life to pretend this was coincidence. He wrapped her tighter, shielding her from a cold, from the world that had already failed her. He did not think about what people would say. Not yet. He thought about warmth, about movement, about the way her breathing steadied when he pressed her close. He thought about the fact that some sins were committed by leaving, and some by walking away after you had already seen. The ride toward town felt longer than it ever had. The baby slept, small face tucked under his chin, while the horse walked careful and slow, as if it too understood the cargo it carried. The cowboy kept his eyes forward. If he looked down too often, he feared the weight of her might undo him. The town came into view, dusty and unimpressed, as it always was. A place that knew how to survive, but not always how to forgive. He rode straight through to the edge, to the small house where a woman lived who had learned endurance the hard way. She answered the knock with caution in her eyes, the kind born from disappointment, but it softened the moment she saw what he held. She did not ask questions at first. She took the baby with hands that remembered loss, cradled her as if the motion itself were a prayer. The child sighed a deep, content sound, and the woman's jaw tightened, as though holding back a history she did not owe anyone. The cowboy told her about the creek. Not every detail, just enough. She listened without interruption, nodding once, as if the world making such cruelty did not surprise her anymore. She brought warm milk, old cloth, a quiet efficiency that spoke of care practiced in silence. By afternoon, the town had noticed. Eyes followed the cowboy. Words traveled faster than truth ever did. A man stepped into his path, clean shirt, careful tone, the sort who measured goodness by appearances. He spoke of propriety, of questions that would be asked, of trouble that did not need inviting. His gaze lingered on the baby, not with concern, but calculation. The cowboy listened, then shook his head once. No anger, no speech, just refusal. That night, as lamplight trembled against the walls, the baby woke crying, sharp and sudden. The cowboy took her, awkward but willing, pacing the floor until her cries softened into hiccup breaths. She looked up at him, eyes unfocused, and her mouth moved again. "Mama." Softer this time. Almost sure. He stopped walking. Outside, the town slept, unaware that something had already changed. The creek had given up its secret, and the land would not be the same for it. The cowboy pressed his forehead to the baby's, feeling the truth settle where fear had been. Some stories begin with gunfire. This one began with a whisper, and the kind of choice that does not let a man return to who he was before. Morning settled into the house with the smell of boiled milk and damp wool. The baby slept in a shallow wooden box lined with folded cloth, her chest rising in small, stubborn movements. The cowboy watched her from a table, hands wrapped around a tin cup he had forgotten to drink from. He had faced storms, broken horses, and men with bad intentions, yet this quiet felt heavier than all of it. The woman moved through the room with practiced care. She did not hover, but she never strayed far. When the baby stirred, she was there before the sound could grow sharp. Her touch was steady, her voice low, the kind that soothed without demanding anything in return. The cowboy noticed how the child's breathing changed when held by her, how tension slipped away as if it recognized safety. By midday, the town had found its excuse to gather. Neighbors passed by more often than usual, eyes lingering, footsteps slowing. Some brought small offerings, a clean cloth, a heel of bread. Others brought nothing, but curiosity sharpened into judgment. The baby became a mirror, reflecting back whatever each person carried inside. The man in the clean shirt returned. He stood in the doorway, hat held stiffly against his chest, voice polished and careful. He spoke of responsibility, of how the world worked, of how mistakes carried consequences that could not be softened by good intentions. He did not say the word shame, but it hovered in the air between his sentences. The woman met his gaze without lowering her eyes. There was a firmness in her now, a line drawn quietly but clearly. She said the baby needed warmth, food, and time. She said the rest could wait. The man's mouth thinned. He spoke of authorities, of records, of how people would talk. When he left, the room felt colder for his absence. That afternoon, the cowboy carried the baby outside. The light had softened, turning the dust gold. He sat on the step and let the sun touch her face. She opened her eyes, dark and searching, and wrapped her fingers around his thumb. The grip surprised him with its strength. He felt something shift inside, a place long closed opening without his permission. The woman joined them, sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. She spoke then not about the future, but about small things. How the baby would need a name soon. How cries meant different things if you listened long enough. How love was not always loud, but it was always present when it mattered. The cowboy listened as if learning a language he had once known and forgotten. By evening, the whispers had grown sharper. A neighbor warned them gently that the town did not like uncertainty. Another suggested, with a sympathetic tilt of the head, that it might be easier to send the child away before attachment complicated things. The cowboy felt anger rise, then fade into something steadier. He looked at the baby, then at the woman, and knew there were losses worse than difficulty. Night brought restlessness. The baby cried often, a thin sound that cut through sleep. The cowboy rose each time, pacing the floor until dawn began to lighten the edges of the window. The woman watched him, noticing how his movements grew more sure, how he spoke softly to the child, telling her about the land, about the creek, about how some places were kinder than people expected. Near dawn, as exhaustion blurred the world, the baby stirred and turned her face toward the woman. Her lips moved, forming the sound again, clearer now, carrying intent. "Mama." The woman froze, breath caught halfway. She did not reach for the child immediately. She only looked at her, eyes shining, as if afraid to claim what had just been offered. The cowboy felt the moment settle, heavy and undeniable. He understood then that the choice before them was no longer about shelter or secrecy. It was about belonging. Outside, the town waited, impatient for order. Inside, something fragile and powerful had already taken root. As the sun rose, the woman finally took the baby into her arms. The child quieted at once, cheek pressed against her chest. The cowboy watched them, knowing that whatever came next would test more than courage. It would test the truth of who they were willing to become. Days began to arrange themselves around the baby's needs, as if time itself had agreed to slow down. Mornings came with soft murmurs and the scrape of a chair pulled close to the wooden box where she slept. The cowboy learned the weight of her, the exact way to hold her, so she settled instead of cried. His hands, once made only for reins and rope, grew careful, almost reverent. The woman grew into the space beside him with equal quietness. She did not claim authority, nor did she ask permission. She simply stayed. She knew which cry meant hunger and which meant fear. She knew when to sing and when silence was the kinder gift. The baby followed her with her eyes, a small sun turning toward warmth, and the woman accepted that attention with a humility that spoke of old wounds slowly knitting closed. The town, however, did not slow. Conversations tightened. The man in the clean shirt began to visit others, speaking in low voices, framing concern as duty. He questioned the cowboy's right to keep what was not his. He spoke of order and consequence, of how kindness without structure invited chaos. Each word found an audience among those who preferred certainty over compassion. The cowboy felt the pressure in subtle ways. Supplies cost a little more. Greetings grew shorter. Doors closed sooner in the evening. He met it with patience, refusing to let bitterness harden him. When he looked at the baby, now stronger, cheeks fuller, he found resolve where fear had once lived. One afternoon, a small gathering formed outside the house. No raised voices, just the weight of expectation. The man spoke again, clearer now, insisting the situation could not continue. The woman stood beside the cowboy, shoulders straight, hand steady. She spoke of the night the baby first slept without crying. She spoke of responsibility not as a rule, but as a promise kept daily. Her voice did not tremble. The baby chose that moment to fuss, stretching her arms toward the woman. When she was lifted, calm returned. The crowd watched, something uneasy shifting through them. It is difficult to argue against peace you can see. That night, the cowboy and the woman sat together after the baby slept. The lamp burned low. He confessed his doubts, his fear of failing her, of failing both of them. The woman listened, then spoke of her own past, of how being cast aside once had taught her the cost of abandonment. She said she would not let it happen again, not if she had breath left to give. The baby stirred, a soft sound escaping her. The woman reached for her, holding her close. The child pressed her face against her chest and whispered the word again, slow and certain. Mama. The cowboy felt his chest tighten, not with pain, but with recognition. The choice had already been made by the smallest voice among them. Outside, the town's lamps dimmed one by one. Inside, a fragile family held fast against the growing storm. The creek's secret had become a test, and not everyone would pass it. The cowboy knew the days ahead would demand more than kindness. They would demand courage that did not announce itself. He watched the woman rock the baby, her silhouette steady against the wall, and understood that whatever the town decided, something unbreakable had already been formed. When he finally laid down to rest, sleep came slowly, but it came with a strange peace. The baby breathed evenly. The woman remained close. And in that stillness, the cowboy accepted the truth that some bonds are not chosen by blood or law, but by the simple act of staying when leaving would be easier. The reckoning arrived without ceremony, carried in on a morning that looked no different from the rest. The air was clear, the light honest, and the baby slept through it all, unaware that her future was being weighed by voices that had never learned her breath. The cowboy felt it before he heard it, a tightening in the chest that told him the waiting was over. They gathered outside the house, not as a mob, but as a judgment shaped like concern. The man in the clean shirt stood near the front, posture composed, words ready. He spoke of necessity, of how situations like this could not be guided by feeling alone. He spoke as though the baby were a problem to be solved, not a life already living its way into permanence. The cowboy stepped forward, the baby held securely against him. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue the rules. He told the truth. About the creek. About the sack tied too tight. About the sound that had pulled him from his horse and would not let him turn away. He spoke of the whisper, of how a word no bigger than breath had changed the shape of his days. Some faces softened. Others hardened, unwilling to be moved. The woman joined him, her hand resting lightly against the baby's back. She spoke of staying, of nights paced and mornings earned, of love that showed itself not in grand declarations, but in repetition, in choosing the same care again and again even when no one was watching. She did not ask permission. She claimed responsibility. The man objected, his voice sharper now. He warned of precedent, of disorder, of what might happen if compassion overruled structure. His words hung in the air, tidy and empty. The baby stirred, as if disturbed by the tension she could not name. The woman took her, pressing her close. The child calmed instantly, fingers curling into fabric she had learned to trust. A hush followed. In it, the baby's mouth moved, forming the sound with unmistakable clarity. Mama. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The word landed and stayed. The woman closed her eyes, breath breaking free, and the cowboy felt something settle that had been restless since the creek. No one spoke for a long moment. Even the man seemed smaller, his certainty thinned by something he could not argue away. The choice, it seemed, had already been made by the one person who mattered most. They did not all agree. Not every face turned kind. But enough did. Enough understood that some laws exist before ink and paper, written instead in the way a child knows where safety lives. The gathering dispersed slowly, conversation softer now, questions left unfinished. Later, when the house grew quiet again, the cowboy stood at the window, watching dust settle where feet had stood. The woman sat nearby, rocking the baby with a patience that felt like grace. He realized then that the fear he had carried was gone, replaced by a steadiness he did not need to explain. They walked to the creek at dusk, the three of them. The land bathed in the kind of light that forgives everything. The water moved on, unchanged, indifferent to the weight it had once held. There was no sack, no trace of what had been done, only the sound of flowing life. The woman dipped her fingers into the current, then touched the baby's brow, as if closing a circle. As they turned back, the cowboy felt the truth of it settle fully. Some stories begin in cruelty, but end in choice. Some families are built not from what is given, but from what is refused to be abandoned. He looked at the woman, at the child between them, and knew this was a beginning that would keep unfolding. If there is a lesson worth carrying, it is this. Mercy does not ask for permission. Love does not wait to be approved. And sometimes, the smallest voice is the one that teaches us how to stay.